Hi everybody and welcome back to my booktube channel, Books with Leo, and today I'm here to talk about everything I've read in January. So I'm usually doing recent favourite reads instead of wrap-ups, but this month I just felt like doing a wrap-up again, so here we are. I did have quite a good reading month. I was ill for quite a bit of the month, but actually I think that helped me read a lot because I didn't have a lot of other things that I could do, so I spent a lot of time reading. So I've made some notes about everything that I've read so I can actually remember and then tell you, which is a great thing. So I think in total I read 8 books this month. It's quite a diverse selection. There's some comics in there. I think there is some romance, definitely. There's some fantasy, more fantasy, and even some poetry. I did read a poetry book this month. So lots of stuff to talk about, so let's just get into it. So the first book I finished this year, and actually also gave 5 stars, was Dial A For Aunties by Jessie Sutanto. So you could say my reading year was definitely off to a very good start with this book. I really enjoyed it. I had such a good time, laughed out loud. This book is really very funny and very witty. So we follow Maddie Chen, and her mum sets her up on a blind date. And she didn't actually ask for this. She doesn't really want this, but she's like, okay, fine, I'll go anyway. I'll see what it brings me. Because her mum has actually been chatting with this man on a dating app. So she did like totally out of her view. Like she didn't know this was happening. Basically, she goes on the date and her date starts acting a little bit rude to her and not so nice. And then he's trying to sort of touch her and she doesn't want him to. And then she ends up accidentally killing him when they come in a really sort of scary situation. And then she has to hide the body. So her and her aunts are in a family business. They do weddings, so they all do a different thing for the wedding. Like one's a makeup artist, one does the cakes, and Maddie is the photographer. And then you basically follow them as they try to hide the murder during a wedding job they have. So it's very messy. The things that I really loved about this book is that it's very funny. I just had such a great time reading it, you know? I just had a good time, and that was really nice. I think a lot of the characters are just very fun and lovable. They're easy characters to root for. Like, even though they do horrible things, which are kind of like, I really understand why Maddie killed this man. So if you read it, you will also understand. And I also really enjoyed the family dynamics in this book. It was just really cool to read. And yeah, the things that I didn't like so much is that this book feels kind of indecisive on what genre it wants to be, because on the one hand, it's sort of a murder story, but on the other hand, it's definitely also a rom-com, because we read a lot about Maddie and her love life and her past boyfriend that she's still really into, who then also shows up at the wedding and makes for a really difficult time. But I think if you both really enjoy rom-coms and also murder stories, then this is perfect. So for me, I really enjoyed it, but I can understand how people feel like, oh my god, this book doesn't know what it really wants to be, because I also felt that whilst reading it. I think also you need a lot of suspension of disbelief, because a lot of the things happening in this book are just so improbable, like this would never happen. And also the plot twist kind of felt not logical to me, but still, I really enjoyed this read, and I've heard that there's also a sequel, so I definitely do plan on picking that one up. And then I also finally finished A Dark and Hollow Star. I had been reading this book for a while, and now I finally finished it, and I did end up really enjoying it, and I'm really looking forward to the sequel, although I have to say, I do not like the sequel cover. I don't know why the first cover is so beautiful, and then the sequel cover is just not. No, yeah, sorry, I just really don't like it, and I'm very upset about it. I loved that this was an urban fantasy. It's been a while since I found an urban fantasy that I really enjoyed, and I'm just really happy that I found this one. And yeah, I just really like urban fantasy as a genre. I used to read it a lot when I was in middle school and high school, so it always feels like a sort of nice throwback and like a little bit of a break from, you know, the difficult high fantasy. Although I have to say, this one was also quite political and had a lot of things going on. What is cool about this book is that it's sort of a murder mystery at the same time. So there's basically this killer on the loose that is doing ritualistic killings, and those killings are threatening to sort of show the fae and fairy world to the humans. And of course, the fae don't want that to happen because they're living in peace. So you have different silly courts. You have the court of fall, winter, spring, summer, like a lot of times in fae books. And that's the same in this book. And then we basically follow one outcast who used to be a fury that hunted monsters, but who's now sort of cast it out of the fae world. We follow a prince and his guardian, and then we follow a girl who's half fae and who's sort of not really accepted into the society, but she is like sort of the chosen one. It's really cool that this is sort of a killer mystery, but an urban fantasy and a fae book at the same time. The whole cast is queer, which was also really cool. There's also some queer romance in here, and there's a lot of angst and a lot of yearning for certain characters, and I just had a good time reading it. There was also a lot of fun banter between the characters, and I also think the worlds and the world building and all the settings were so beautiful and so cool, and I just really enjoyed those. The ending of this book, however, felt a little bit rushed to me. I was like, God, there's so many things happening at once, and it was like, there was even this one point where like the bad guy sort of explained this whole story to the heroes, and I was like, okay, that's why. And there was also this other element that came into it at the end of the story that I just felt was very misplaced and weird, but it turns out that will be a really bigger part of the story in the sequels and stuff. And that was sort of like the plan all along, but it felt really misplaced to me, and I really didn't understand what was like the use of that. So I think if you've read it, you know what I'm talking about maybe, but I just felt it was strange. However, I did really enjoy this read, and I'm really happy I picked it up. And then I picked up a poetry collection, and that is New Names for Lost Things by Noor Unahar. I liked this, but I also kind of didn't. I love Noor's visual work. I think the art she creates and the collages that she makes are just really beautiful, and I also really enjoyed those in this book. They are very sort of art journal-y, and I love to art journal, so I like that, but at the same time they're sort of raw but also minimalistic and very stylized. I just said they were raw and stylized at the same time. I don't know, it's just kind of, it feels very real, but at the same time it's very sort of centered, and you know, it's all put together in a way that it looks really good. And it was much more minimalistic than the work I'm used to of her, so I did really enjoy seeing that. But the actual poetry in this book, there was a few poems that I thought were really beautiful, and I definitely think that Noor writes really beautiful prose. So oftentimes I would be like, this is such a beautiful sentence, but it just feels very out of context, like there's no context attached to it within this poem. Like it would just be a bunch of beautiful sentences, and they would kind of like tell me nothing, or at least that's how I felt. Of course, I think views on poetry are very subjective always. That's with all of literature, of course. There was definitely one or two poems that I thought were really, really beautiful, and I bookmarked, but then for the rest of it, it was just kind of like, nah, I didn't really care for it. And there was this one poem which had a line about a toe. No, I was so done with this entire book when I came to that line. I think it was something like, you didn't inherit his fear, but you did inherit his toes, or something of the sort. And I just, no, why would you put that in a poem? I did not like that. Anyway, moving on. I picked up a comic and I started reading the Lock and Key comics, and I'm really excited about this because I did watch the Lock and Key Netflix show and I really enjoyed it. I especially liked that it was very whimsical and colourful, but at the same time creepy and scary, and a very sort of elaborate fantasy world, and I thought that was really cool. The graphic novel was definitely a lot more grim and a lot more gruesome, much more scary and less whimsy and colourful. It has this very muted, like, grey, browns color scheme, but I did think it was really cool to see this like story portrayed in comic style. I think the comic was the original, so it was really cool to see sort of what was the ground material for the TV show. And yeah, I did really enjoy it. I do plan on picking up the other volumes, but it was definitely very different from the Netflix show, although I did still think it was good, so that was cool. And then I started reading Love and Other Disasters by Anita Kelly. This story was a little bit hard for me to get into actually, because I just felt like the beginning was kind of boring. I felt there was like a lot of talk about the cooking show, but not actually seeing scenes during the cooking show, which just really annoyed me. But that happened a lot less in the rest of the novel. So I struggled a bit at the beginning and I wasn't sure whether I wanted to continue the book, but I didn't really have anything else to do. So then I did end up trying to push through, and I did end up really liking this story actually. So this is a rom-com book, and it's basically about these two contestants on a cooking show, and then they fall for each other, but they're rivals. And also one of the contestants is non-binary, and they are really struggling with being in the public eye and all of the things that happen because of that. I really liked the banter and the dynamics between the characters. I thought the characters themselves were also really lovable. I loved the cooking show aspect. I loved reading about all of the different dishes and the things they were creating. It was sort of like watching a cooking show on TV, but then like really rooting for the characters and really cheering them on, like, oh my god, I also want you all to fall in love, and that would be great. There were some insufferable characters as well. Lizzie. There was a smut scene though, in which they started licking each other's feet, which was not really my favorite part. I was like reading it and I came to the feet part and I was like, no, I disagree. To each their own, of course, and I did really like the overall novel and I had a good time reading it. And then I picked up this book called In 5 Years by Rebecca Searle. This book had a really interesting concept. However, the execution was not really my favorite thing ever, but I did really like the concept of the book. So it was basically about this girl called Denny who has her whole life together. She's engaged to a perfect fiance. She is saving up for the perfect apartment. She just got this amazing lawyer job that she's wanted for a really long time. She has a perfect best friend. Everything is amazing. She gets engaged and then she falls asleep on the night of her engagement, feeling like everything is coming together. And then she wakes up in a different apartment with a different engagement ring on her finger with a different man 5 years in the future. And then she's there for like just a little bit, and then she goes back to the present, and then she has to sort of grapple with, is her life as perfect as she thinks, or should she maybe reconsider some things and think about what is good for her instead of what she's really wanted all her life and what she's like been striving for, even though she's really pushing herself and like planning everything out. This book felt kind of pointless because when everything wrapped up, it just wasn't satisfying for me. Actually, the one part that I did really enjoy was when she traveled to the future and back. Like, I thought that was really cool and well done. But the actual, like, conclusions and things that she learned from that, like, I felt like she was just trying to suppress her sort of adventure the whole time, which was really annoying. And I also felt like she made really poor choices. She was trying to control everybody in the book. I felt like she was very unlikable as a character. So it was definitely difficult for me to, like, root for her. I just didn't like her. I did relate, however, to her feeling very uptight and nervous because same. Anyway, I felt like her motivations as a character were also just like a little bit weird, but I did read the whole thing and I did have sort of an interesting time whilst reading it, but I just felt like it was sad, didn't have a great conclusion. But I did like the concept and I want to pick up some time travel books in which I do like the rest of the book as well. I really need to read part 2 of When the Coffee Gets Cold because I really liked that first book too. But if you have any other recommendations for me, let me know. Then I read some books that may be a bit surprising to you guys because I said I would never, ever read Throne of Glass, but here I am and I did read the first book this month and I also read the second book. And now I'm also reading the third book. So this is basically my friend's fault because they are doing sort of like a book club, 2 of my friends, and they are talking about the books in this WhatsApp group. And then I really wanted to join, so I bought the whole box set, I know, and started reading them. And actually, I'm having a great time. Before filming this, I sort of looked up that video again in which I'm like, I don't think I'll ever read Throne of Glass. I'm just not interested in it. Oops. Anyway, these books, I just liked them a surprising amount. I knew they were about an assassin, but I just thought it wouldn't be satisfying, and I kind of forgot as well how much I like books with assassins as main characters, and I did really enjoy it. So the first one is basically about Selena Sadothian, who is a slave in the mines of Endovir, and then she gets pulled away to go to the castle and enter this competition to become the king's champion, which is basically the king's assassin. What I really liked about this book was the banter between the characters, the dynamics. I really enjoyed like the assassin bit, although I did feel like it was a lot of tell and not show, because whenever she actually had to kill somebody, she was always very traumatized and having a hard time with it. And I was like, you're supposed to be this cold-hearted, cold-blood killer. However, I did like her as a character, even though she was kind of messy. The love triangle, not my favorite thing. I wish they would banish that from YA and fantasy altogether. But I get that it comes with the genre, sort of. Also, nobody has ever told me that this book is bursting with passages about secret hallways and castles and discovering that, which I love in fantasy. It's one of my favorite things, so that was really enjoyable. And then I also really enjoyed book 2, actually, and now I'm in the middle of book 3, and I'm enjoying that the most so far, actually, because there's now also witches coming into play. Which is really cool. The plot twist at the end of this, did not see it coming, and I felt so stupid that I did not see it coming. I was like, how did I not pick up on this? What is wrong with me? Anyway, those were all the books I read in January. I had a really, really good reading month. I hope you guys had as well. Let me know what you've read in the comments down below, or let me know if you've read any of these books or you have any recommendations for me. And if you don't know what to comment, leave some nice retro emojis to match my blouse of the day. That's a really weird request, but I just feel like I've got to be innovative with the emoji requests. I really hope you guys enjoyed this video, and I'll see you on my next one. Bye, have a good day.